Hey folks, today we're going to take a look at a game that is currently seeking funding on Kickstarter. That game is called Crime Writers, and it's from Lula Games. Now, if you like what you see throughout the rest of this preview video, I'm going to encourage you to go to the official Kickstarter project page. You can do that by following the link in the top corner of your screen, as well as down in the description section underneath this video. Now, Crime Writers is a competitive storytelling game, or story writing game, I should say, more specifically. You and the other players are competing against each other in order to tell the most spine-chilling murder mystery story ever. But to put a more finer point on it, you're trying to get the other players to guess what the elements of those stories are based only on the title alone. Of course, there's a few more twists and turns to it than that, so of course I'm going to give you a brief look at how the game is played with a prototype version of the game, so do bear in mind that what you see here may change slightly in the final version and more things may be added and stuff like that, so that's why you should go to the Kickstarter page. But in any event, after this, we're going to come back and we will discuss it further. Crime Writers is a competitive storytelling game for 2 to 10 players. Each player will use multiple plot elements, some chosen randomly, some of their own choosing, to write a short story that involves a dark crime. Players will be awarded points for guessing the correct elements of another player's story, but also for keeping the other players guessing as to the elements of their own story for as long as possible. Whoever has the most points after everyone's story has been analyzed will be the winner of the game. Start off by giving each player a piece of paper and something to write with. One player will be designated the Master Scribe, and will write down everyone's name and keep track of each of their points during the course of the game. Someone will also have to have a timer of some sort to use during the game. There are 4 decks of story element cards in the game. At the start, you'll shuffle each of them and leave them within reach of all players. Then, each player will draw a total of 3 cards from whatever stacks they want in any combination they want, without showing the other players. Players are limited to only 2 cards from the Killer/Victim deck. That's because, by drawing 2 cards, you're locking in one of those cards to be the killer and one to be the victim, with no room in the story for anyone else. These cards represent the who and whom of each player's story. The motive cards represent the why of the story. What made the killer target the victim? The crime scene cards represent the where of the story. Where does the horrible crime happen? And lastly, cause of death cards represent the how of the story. How did the killer finish off his victim and using what? There are 2 main stages of the game. The first is the writing stage. Set a timer for 10 minutes. That's how long everyone has to write a short story involving the plot elements that were drawn, as well as others that you must come up with on your own. Write down the element categories on your sheet. Who, whom, why, where, and how. Fill in the elements you received from the 3 cards that you drew, but then you must come up with the 2 missing elements from your own imagination, and write a story using all of them. If you decide here that one of your cards isn't working out, you can return it to the deck and replace it with another one from the same deck, but you can only do this once. Every element must be clearly and unambiguously used in your story, but more importantly, they must be relevant to the story, not just a set piece. You do, however, have leeway as to how they're used and the exact nature of them. For example, if one of your plot elements was a bridge, it could refer to a small, rickety wooden bridge in a tiny village, or it could refer to the Golden Gate Bridge. You must also come up with a title for your story during this time. This is the only thing you'll read to the other players before they start asking you questions, so it's important that it gives clues and spurs conversation, but it cannot contain the names of your story elements or even synonyms of them. Once everyone is done writing, or time runs out, someone is designated to be the starting writer who will read the title of their story, and everyone else is now considered a guest. Start a timer. The guest to the left of the starting writer will be the first to ask a question, and then it will go around eventually. The guest can ask whatever question they want, but the writer can only respond with yes, also, almost, no, or not important. If the answer to the question is yes, also, or almost, the guest can ask another question right away. But as soon as the writer says no or not important, the guest's turn is over and it goes to the next guest in clockwise order. For example, in the example I have here, someone could ask me, was the killing intentional? And I'd say yes, and that person gets another question. But if the next question was, does the killer know the victim? I'd say no, and then it's on to the next guest. If at any time the guest asks a question that directly gives away a plot element, like in this example, is the killer a burglar, that player has guessed the correct element and they receive 3 points. This does not happen in a 2-player game, however. The writer, however, in any game, regardless of the number of players, will get 1 point for every minute that the other players are still trying to figure out the plot elements. In this way, it helps the writer a lot to make the story hard to guess, and since the other players know this, it behooves them to keep the questions brief and keep it moving. After all 5 plot elements are guessed, the timer stops for the writer and they will receive their points. But the round isn't actually over yet. The other players must still try to guess and flesh out the fine details of the writer's story. This is just for fun, though, with no points at stake, so the writer is encouraged to help the guests when necessary to keep the game moving. After one story is resolved, the next player in order will become the writer and the other players the guests, and you'll do it all over again. Keep doing this until every other player's story has been guessed out completely. Then, the master scribe will add up everyone's points. Whoever has the most is the winner. Well, I think one of the most interesting things about Crime Writers is the fact that, there are other games that fall into the storytelling or story writing type genre, but a lot of those games are really free form. You can barely call those other games because you're literally just saying, I tell a story, and then you tell a story, and then someone judges it, or something like that. But there's definitely a structure to Crime Writers, which makes it so that, yes, you do have to be creative, or it is encouraged strongly for you to be creative with your storytelling. But there are definitive game elements where you have to be able to get the other players to guess what you don't want them to do that. You want to run out the time as much as possible if you're the story writer and it's your turn at the podium, so to speak. But you still need to tell a cohesive story, and in order for all the other players to sort of get involved and to start guessing and things like that. And then as the guest, the party guest, when it's your turn to do that, you have to make these educated guesses as to what the crime story writer is trying to get across to you. And that's easier said than done because you have a limited amount of questions. Well, you can potentially ask a lot of questions, but as soon as you guess one and the answer is no or not pertinent, then boom, it's on to the next person. And remember, you're queuing up for the next person. So your question might have been a dead end, but the next player in line might say, oh no, I liked where you were going with that, and they're going to ask a better question, and they might steal those points from you from getting the proper guess. So, all this is to say, there is a definitive structure and strategy to this game as opposed to other storytelling games which are just like totally all over the place and no rhyme or reason to them. The whole thing where you have to, as the writer for that go-around, you are trying to... You have to answer the questions honestly, but hopefully you made and weaved such a tale that you keep them guessing with those, the 2 different elements that you had to make up on your own. And that's where the game sort of throws the monkey wrench in. It would be, if all of the elements that you had, all 5 of them, were from the deck of cards, then it would be kind of easy eventually, depending how many times you've played, to guess just based on what cards are in the deck. Having to make up your own throws an interesting wrench into the works. So you have all these different things going on. I mean, the fact of the matter is the game is very easy to set up, very easy to teach, very fast to play, very fast to teach. And because of the subject matter, I mean, yeah, it's about murder mystery. I guess depending on what kind of group you're with, it could get kind of grisly with the descriptions. But you could also play this with younger gamers too. I don't think that'd be that much of a problem. Just say, keep it light, And you can really adjust the game to how you want it to be. Do you want it to everyone to write really long, in-depth stories? You could make this game into a writing workshop pretty easily. But because it's also a game, it's encouraging people to stay involved in it. And it's not just sort of lose their way and be like, I don't feel like writing or something like that. So there is, despite it being a very small package and a very small allotment of stuff and just a bunch of cards, it has more game to it than you would expect. So if any of this strikes your fancy, if you like the idea of creative writing, but you also like the idea of there being sort of this fun guessing game with the other players, look, you don't have to take my word for any of this. Go to the official Kickstarter page and find out more information about it and see if it's right for you, because I'm sure there'll be more stuff added to the game as time goes on. You can follow the link in the top corner of your screen, as well as down in the description section underneath this video. That is Crime Writers from Lella Games. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, for supporting our sponsors. Take care.